Hey,
Hello.
what emotionally moving music that was.
I didn't hear anything. It was a sound of silence.
Oh, that's so sad. I was getting this, yeah, the waiting music that really like makes your heart swell.
Hmm. Cool. This is my first time using a live stream, so maybe that's why I'm a bit of a noob at listening to music on
Welcome
it.
to the future.
um, how you, Sarah?
I'm just really peaceful and at ease because I was hearing the music, and boy, was it calming.
Lovely.
What do we want to do today?
Well, I thought maybe we could start off with chatting a bit about Microsolidarity and how it came into being for those who are unfamiliar or curious and never heard of the story. Maybe it helps to set a bit of context in that way as well, and then it would be really cool to open it up. Basically, it's more of a Q&A session, so open it up for anyone who's listening in to ask questions about anything that we share or anything you might have heard about or pondered about in terms of microsolidarity. Yeah, I hope it will be a really interesting session to help bring a bit more clarity about like what is microsolidarity and what can it do, what problem does it solve, and what's worked well so far, where have we got to. I see it as pretty much like an R&D project that's ongoing in its development in a very collaborative way. Any of you who don't know Sarah is here because she's also been part of the network support crew, and we wanted to have her here because we were just on a call together, and I thought, oh, maybe she has some really cool additions to share from her personal experience. So I'd love to make space for you as well, Sarah, at some point. But maybe, Rich, do you want to dive in with like how did it get started? What's the origin story, the lore of
Yeah,
Microsolidarity?
yeah, I can share some of the story. I feel like I've been so up close to this for so long that um I may not explain it in the clearest way, so I welcome your contributions from both of you. Um, the story I think is, well, back in my day, like if I cast the clock all the way back, um, I was raised in this quite old-fashioned Christian community, and the upside of that was like really extraordinary solidarity, like just um, a large network of families that really cared about each other, and you could kind of count on them to, yeah, just that practical, I mean, like the maybe the dramatic but simple example is like if me or my siblings, like if my parents were in an accident or something bad happened like that, um, me and my siblings had like, I don't know, 15, 20, 25 families that we would have been welcome to just like become part of their family. And yeah, there's this sense of like we're mutually responsible for each other. We care about each other. We have some sense of like shared purpose in the world, some membership in a group that's like trying to be wholesome and yeah, bring out the best in each other. That was the upside. The downside was what I took to be rather extraordinary conformity pressure, meaning you have to believe this specific set of principles, values. Like there's an agenda. There's like we need basically your thinking to line up with each other. There needs to be this very strong alignment. And if you don't agree with these beliefs, then you're not welcome here. And that that's for me, personally, very uncool to have conformity of belief as a requirement for belonging. Um, and so I left, and I missed the solidarity. Like I missed having the sense of being um, part of something bigger than myself. I missed the sense of having this like abundant network of care. Jocelyn, can you mute your mic, please? I'm getting
Sure.
dreadful feedback that makes my brain go funny. Um, Yeah, I missed having the sense of care, the sense of like extended family essentially. But I really relished the freedom of not having to think the same as everybody else. And um, there was like quite a few years of suffering, and then eventually, like through some random wandering in the world, found my way into progressively more and more satisfying forms of community. And um, that kind of culminated, I guess, when I got introduced to the Inspiral network in New Zealand, where I'm from, and Inspiral being this like radically decentralized, non-hierarchical, anti-authoritarian, peer-to-peer support network of people like trying to do something useful in the world, trying to use business for positive ends, trying to organize in a radical way that where they get to like prototype different ways of working where you don't have a traditional hierarchy, a traditional like system of management and bosses and that sort of thing. And that community, yeah, like in retrospect, did kind of supplement what I was missing about having the church solidarity, like a sense of purpose, a sense of care, a sense of companionship, um, and a space to grow, like a developmental container, like a place where I was witnessed in my highs and my lows, and I had a circle of trustworthy adults that I could go and sit with and share from my heart. Um, and yeah, that motivated me to grow, to like by being with them. And so, Inspiral, awesome, had a great time. Um, And then me and Natty, my wife, decided to leave New Zealand, and we're like, okay, well, how are we gonna carry some of that? How am I gonna recreate the Inspiral experience in Europe? That was the question. Um, and it's not so obvious how to do that because like building a community is a very context dependent, contingent, complex, like the reason the Inspiral community works is because like one specific person started a process and invited a bunch of other specific people that live in a specific culture with specific history, and like it's not at all obvious like what can you learn from successfully founding a community, like what lessons translate from that space to other spaces. It's really not at all straightforwardly obvious, like how do you copy and paste from one social context into another. Um, and so we gave it a lot of thought, talked to a lot of people. My work is working with organizations and communities, so I've got a lot of exposure to this challenge of what is it about groups? What are the common patterns across all kinds of groups? Um, and at the very end of 2018, I wrote a blog post. I was like, "This is the plan. I'm going to start a community. This is how we're going to do it. These are the priorities. This is the sort of principles that we're holding on to." Um, and quite surprisingly, that blog post was like one of maybe the three most popular things I've ever written. Like it just hit a um, viral moment. Just like I got this enormous amount of feedback from people saying, "We're also building community exactly like you're describing, but what you've done, Rich, is just put some clearer articulation of the boundaries, the principles, like this part of the blog post is sort of saying there's missing language about how groups work, and because we don't have sophisticated language, we have this clumsy thinking about how to do it well. And so I proposed some language, and people were like, "Oh, that's so helpful." And so then then I sort of transitioned my uh, mentality, or what I thought the project was. At first, I thought the project was I'm going to start a community. But the reception to that blog post was like, oh, it's not just about me starting a community. It's actually about building a network of community builders. And like you said, Jocelyn, doing an open source R&D project where we get community builders from lots of different contexts in the world to get together and compare notes and to see if we can like establish any best practice, or like what works, like what practices, what are we even trying to do, how do we put into words what we're trying to do, and we can learn from each other and be in this peer support process. So that yeah, that's the sort of like genesis story. I just saw a comment there from Lucas to get the blog post, so I will get that link while I hear your response.
My response, did you mean, Rich? Yes, cool. Yeah, So like what basically what a question often comes up for me when you share this story is what gave you the courage and the belief to dream that you could create your own community in that with that same vibe as in Spiral. And I ask that because I think a lot of people come into Microsolidarity being like, how do I create community? And you were just like, I'm gonna do it. Or it seems like you kind of just went and did it. But I imagine there are some like of those universal patterns that you like mentioned in your what you just said, like the universal things that you could bring from New London and Spiral to here. I don't know if you want to like riff on that.
Just multitasking the chat stream at the same time. That's good. It's great getting some of these questions come through. I think we'll do a little bit of like sort of scene setting, context setting, and then we'll get into Q&A mode, which would be great. Yeah, where did I get the courage from? Where does courage come from in general? I mean, this is part of the blog post. Where does courage come from? It comes from encouragement. Like it comes from, it's a social process. It's like being with the right people encourages you and like charges you up. Like I think, yeah, the sort of, maybe if you have this mental image of courage as being this like, I don't know, tough guy from the Marine Corps or something like that. It's like, he's not actually getting his courage from his guts. He's getting it from his brotherhood, you know, like the courage comes from knowing that there's this squad of people that have your back and that are like holding you to high standards and supporting you when you're low and celebrating you when you're high. So like, yeah, I think that the process for me was like traveling a lot, meeting a lot of people and starting to filter and get to a list of like, okay, who specifically do I know? Like, can I write a list of 15 people that I want to get closer to, that I've met in my travels? And then like taking that courageous step, I guess, of saying like, hey, I want to do something with you. Do you want to do it with me too? You know, it's just like asking someone on a date, but maybe slightly less common, you know, and don't have so many norms about it.
Nice. And so then you and Natty at some point put together the practice program, which was, I guess, one of the
Yeah.
way to like condense some of the learnings that of the things that worked. And actually, those videos are available for anyone to watch on YouTube. By the way, there's like 4 videos, and it talks a lot about these scales or like how to get started, like creating that connection on a small scale first. Yeah. So you put that together, and it seemed like it became quite successful. I don't know how many you ran after each other, like a few, one after the other, right? The pandemic
Yeah.
time. I'm curious about that. Yeah. Yeah.
I think we did like, I don't know. Yeah, so basically our community building plan was interrupted by the pandemic because we just had to get people together. And so then we sort of like updated and we're like, okay, well, we can do an online course. You know, we can at least keep the dream alive and like do stuff together, but online. And yeah, Natty's a really awesome process designer and curriculum designer. And so she helped to translate like a whole bunch of rather abstract concepts into specific practices. And at first it was a week, it was like five calls in a row. And then we slightly shifted it. So now it's 4 calls spread over 2 weeks. And each call, you know, like you're in a cohort of 20 or 30 people and they start out as strangers. And then over the course of those 4 sessions, it's very simple exercises, you know, it's just there's a facilitator saying, okay, I'm going to put you in a breakout room for 15 minutes and you're going to answer these 3 questions, or, you know, like really, I think quite simple stuff. But invariably, after a couple of calls, 3 calls, 4 calls, people are like, oh my God, I feel so connected to these people. I'm really getting meaningful support with the challenges that I'm bringing. I have this lovely sense of belonging and care. And like, I can't believe that, you know, last week we were strangers. And to me, like as an engineer, that's my trainings in engineering. It's like I'm fascinated by what's the engineering process behind creating that sense of trust in a group and that sense of coherence and like coordination and willingness to support each other. And I think we've proven over the years of running these courses, you know, I think we've had like 450, 500 people or something through the courses now. And very high rates of people having that experience of like, wow, the vibe feels awesome here. And it's because I think as facilitators, we're making specific choices about how we're structuring the encounter that sets people up in the best possible way. And like, the point is not just to create a nice feeling. The point I think is to like be able to educate people in how do you, what are the choices, what are the design choices you can make when you're inviting people into a group experience so that they're biased towards having those kind of satisfying experiences. I wonder if we can hear from Sarah. Speaking
Yes.
of satisfying experiences, I feel like you're like the poster child of enthusiasm for having joined Microsolidarity fairly early on and had it's had some significant impact on you. I don't know how much of that you want to talk about. But yeah, anything you want to share, I think is going to be very fascinating.
What you claim is true. I've found so much, and a lot of it has to do with what you're calling the developmental context, getting into this orbit of people who just really know about this stuff, and that giving me a practice space. I think a useful thing for me to share is that there's some similarity in my background to Rich, what you have in your background. For me, the way that worked in my life was in 2015, I was involved with a community for about 3.5 years that had really toxic power dynamics. The way they generated group coherence and collective action was by diminishing like individual agency. And I was getting a good bit of good stuff from that around being in community and the sense of belonging. But there's real diminishing returns as I noticed more and more, like at what cost? Because there really is a shadow side to all this stuff. And that shadow side was not being dealt with or really even recognized. It wasn't being integrated, right? And so in leaving that scene, I've been really driven by this question of how do we do this community building work, driving towards solidarity and collective action, but while preserving or even amplifying individual agency. And that's what really excites me about microsolidarity is I feel it's a group of people who are doing that, or at least directionalizing themselves towards that, and have some of these things in mind. So events and programming that are offered by Microsolidarity, I would call relational gyms towards that end. Like I feel like I'm going to the gym and hanging out with my friends, and what we're doing there is we're practicing, we're building these muscles around relationship. Because a frustrating thing as I started to explore more community is that there's a lot of like unanswered questions, a lack of language, right? Rich, this is part of what you're getting at with your writings is like, how do we develop a language so we can all be more effective and move into practice with each other? And so when I first joined the online practice program that y'all are mentioning during COVID times, I was aghast. I was like, here's this feeling in my body of the best part of what I had in this community I left, a feeling of belonging and solidarity, but I didn't have to give up anything. I didn't have to like lean into the shadow side to get the thing. I was being honored and seen by people, and being allowed to be my whole self. And that was just like so powerful for me to get that experience. And I've just kept showing up to the gym. I keep going to the gym, and it's had a lot of returns for me. I'm like, if you can imagine like a spiritual version of myself, I was like this kind of scrawny little little egg. And then I kept going to the gym, and now I'm super powered. I'm like, I've gotten Dragon Ball Z Super Saiyan in my relational body. And I found a community of practice, a place to live. I'm finding, meaningful work. And it's all just because I keep showing up and meeting people and building that solidarity. So yes, it has been a huge success story in my life. I've recently just totally fallen in love with someone I met through the network. And oh my God, like having a community of practice with a loved one, with a romantic partner, I'm so excited of what is made possible by that. And it's new territory for me, so it's also terrifying. But the terror, right, Rich, you're also mentioning this, is like alleviated by knowing that I have people who have my back. And I've been really connected to really what's important for me, Sarah, and I've had space to do that. And so it makes me feel a huge resilience to keep going.
So I guess we could say that if you come to the upcoming Microsolidarity course, become a member of the network, keep showing up, you're going to find love. So guarantee.
Guaranteed. Or your money back? Question mark. But you have to give it like 20 years. But for me, it was a lot quicker, you know? No, it can happen fast is the thing when we're in community, when we're with people who are showing up for that. Yeah.
That's awesome. It's really motivating to hear that. And to witness it, like to witness in you, the person that I met at the first gathering and now who I see. It just feels like I get to see much more of you, that like there's this fuller, broader character, weirder character, I must say, than the one that I originally met, which is what I feel like people are like when you get to know them, when they actually feel safe, you get to see how weird they are.
There's much more of me, and turns out a lot of it's weird, and I'm cool with that.
Yeah. I wonder if it's interesting for us to respond. I don't know how to pronounce the Greek symbols from the commenter, but Del Vasto I can read. I'm going to highlight this one comment here. I think it's great. It sounds like the type of community building you're doing also has conformity pressure. It's just far less legible and more based on vibes. Maybe you could start by responding to that, Sarah, and then we can go to Jocelyn and see. Well, yeah, just tell us about conformity and your experience of it in the community and like how you think about it.
Yeah, I had noticed this in the chat, and this is part of what I mentioned that I called a shadow. But I think that there's always shadows, and the question is, do we integrate them or do we ignore them, etc. So conformity might be something I would call a shadow in this framing. It's like a thing that will come up as you move towards group coherence, collective action as a possibility. And so Microsolidarity, I think, looks at these things and says, yes, we like there's enough history here. We know that this is a shadow that can come up, and how do we design to integrate it? And so Microsolidarity, one thing we can say about it is it's really a community of plurality. It doesn't it doesn't have strong opinions about what the important work is. It's just more like getting people together and looking at what is underneath that. And I find that that's like the important design principle that's always alive when we're talking about Microsolidarity and doing things together.
Yeah, I find it a really interesting question as well. I think there's something around like conformity to me. It's like is like a pressurized version of structure, and like when structure feels like overbearing and I can't like use my own agency within it, it's like there's more a sense of, or like, oh yeah, you have to be like a certain way in order to belong. I don't know, just the word structure came up when I heard conformity. I was like, is it because there is a degree of like we recommend certain structures and there are certain patterns that tend to work. So when we have, for example, like a gathering or so, it's quite often that we would put people up together in crews to have little support pods for the time together, because it's easier to have a bit more, like share a bit more vulnerably and just have a bit more space for people to see you and witness you through how you're doing that day and maybe what you want to experience during the gathering and help you to get there, than just being one person within a larger group. So that degree of there's a degree of structure and there's a certain degree of like more of a magnetizing towards like what are the values that support a sense of like good hospitality. So what does it mean to show up as like a hospitable host? How do you come as a guest and use your agency that the structure provides in order to make it your own? I mean, that's actually an important part that's coming up for me in this question, actually, around like agency and conformity. Like the ideas, the structures of Microsolidarity would actually increase someone's individual agency to contribute to the greater whole, in a way that's not actually creating conformity, but allowing for more multiplicity. That allows for maybe people to find that they're the people who they really resonate with and totally get them because they have shared identity, shared history, shared experience of a certain thing, but that you can also show up in the larger group, and that there's space for people to like represent different aspects of the coin, and to be sort of in a curious space that can be with complexity and maybe with a certain degree of ambiguity, that is much more organic than this is the dogma, this is how it should be, this is how it always will be. Yeah.
Yeah, both of what you're saying really tracks with my experience too. I think I do want to say something in favor of conformity, maybe. Like, um, I think we need to agree on some stuff. Like, if everyone is doing, if people are not relating to each other, you know, then it's like you don't have a community. There's got to be some degree of agreement there. And conformity has obviously, so it has like a negative impression on it, but like, we do need some degree of alignment. I'm really influenced by a book called Protocol by Alex Galloway. And he, if I remember it correctly, I read it a long time ago, but the message I took from it anyway is like looking at the internet protocol, you have very extremely strict definition of what qualifies as a valid data packet of internet content. And if you don't have the right bit in the right place, your message is not going to get through. It's kind of like authoritarian in that sense. You have to be perfectly aligned with this protocol to get a message sent across the internet. And if you don't do it, then it doesn't. You're rejected. You know, you have to be fully conformist. But then the content of that data packet can be anything. You know, it can. It's like there's such a vast array of different expressions that can fit inside of that packet. And I'm really inspired by that with how I think about what's the minimum viable consensus that a group needs. Like, I think we need some protocol. I think we need some agreement about how do we treat each other, how do we communicate, like, yeah, how do we react when there's disagreement or conflict and things like that. I want some degree of conformity on that, but then, like you said, Sarah, we haven't actually got any agreement about. We don't expect agreement on what's most important to you. You know, like you might have your particular political mission, and I'm like excited for you that you found this thing to be passionate about. But at least within the network, people don't really expect the other person to share your priorities. It's not really, you know, it's more like how curious that you have this, you care about this different thing that I care about, and what can we learn? And is it doesn't make sense for us to collaborate? You know, like with your musicians, I've just seen Boone Deluxe has showed up in the chat. I've been collaborating with him musically, and it's like it's fun to collaborate with him because he's different than me. You know, like if we were exactly the same, there would be no point for us to be getting together. I also wanted to pick up on this other more general question, which I think is worth highlighting as well, which is related to all of this, this is from Thomas. I've learned how to pronounce those symbols. Can you give an example of which shadows you're talking about and how you integrate them? Because I think, Sarah, you mentioned the shadows of community a bunch. I shared a blog post there where I wrote about the shadows of community too. I would say, just from my perspective, the main shadow that I have in mind is just about how we deal with power and status and rank, and like how a lot of people, I think the reason we had 400 or 500 people show up for the courses, for example, is because people are hungry to belong. They've got a deep need, like a primal yearning to be part of a tribe. And when there's a promise of it, it's intoxicating. Like, oh, maybe here's a place where I'm going to be accepted at long last, you know? And when you've got something valuable like that on offer, you can manipulate people, you can take advantage of them. Like, and I'm not saying that the main risk is not consciously people being evil and like doing the cult leader thing, but more unconsciously not being aware of how group dynamics work in general and creating implicit pressure on people. Like, if you want the sweet prize of belonging, you are going to have to remake your identity to match the people who have been in this community for the longest. And the more you look like them, the more belonging you'll get. Like that, I just think is happening in every group. In every group, there's some kind of mammal instinct of like, oh, I should see who is the most in person, and then can I repattern myself to look like that, and then I'll be the safest. Um, and we can be aware of dynamics like that and anticipate them and intentionally design interventions that interrupt that pattern. And those interventions, like number one, talking about taboos. So like just having transparent conversations about like, hi, I'm Rich, I'm the founder, I have more power in this network than anyone. Like, let's have a conversation about how to make that as healthy as we can instead of pretending like it doesn't exist. And like, how do we do that without me self-aggrandizing? It's complicated. That's why I have these wonderful friends and collaborators that like we kind of like calibrate and balance of each other. But it's more than just talking about the taboos. It's also, I think, like quite specific actions that we take in events and so on to like celebrate dissent. Like if someone is going against the grain, if they're rebelling in some way, there's always this impulse of like, oh my God, things are going wrong. But like, can we elevate the voice that says no? Can we like make sure they've got backup, they've got someone standing at their side, that they're not isolated in that dissenting position, to make sure that they're really heard and encouraged to like be real about their perspective. Yeah, I think there's a whole bunch of practices that we're putting in, which is mostly just about, can we cultivate a healthy exercise of power and make it transparent? I wonder if either of you had more ideas stirred by this question about the shadows of community.
I had one element of like, it's similar to what you're saying, but groupthink of it being, yeah, it just echoes what you're saying, really. Just very easy to slip into, oh, this is what's the right way to think around here. And that specific, I think that is challenging on an individual level, because I think it's important for people to be able to come up with their own conclusions and like exhibit their own degree of like individual truth. In But I think one thing that I find a shadow side of groupthink is not just like its impact on the individual, but how it sets one group apart, or like to become intolerant of another greater, large group. Like, oh, we all believe that it's really important to welcome all voices, and then, oh, apparently it's not okay when people speak over the top of each other. And if other people do that, if people are more into debate, or like they're more hot-headed, that's not welcome here. And there's a certain way we should speak, there's a certain way that we should go through conflict. I think it can be very important to, as you said, like welcome dissenting voices, and welcome when someone's like, actually, I just have a different way of navigating conflict. My background's a lot with mediation and conflict, so my examples are more from that realm. But yeah, even that question of what's the right way to handle tension, or what's the right way to come back into connection. How soon should we do that? If you see that another group does it differently, and you start to think this is the right way to do it, I think it can create a bit of intolerance of like wider systemic patterns in other groups, rather than continuing. I'd love it. Like, my dream is that we manage to celebrate and like work with multiplicity and dynamic complexity well enough on a smaller scale that we also recognize the sort of system that in a systemic larger scale as well, which is where this like scales in microsolidarities is not just about how we create belonging, but also about understanding the wider world context and how like relationships work on different group scales, because there are principles that apply like nested eggs into quite large realms, I think.
Yeah, I was thinking that when you were saying about the debate style or the communication style, for example, like um, I think scale is a important determining factor for this. So like, I think it's completely appropriate that if you are, I don't know, like Sarah running the kitchen team, or you're making a startup, or it's your house or something, you've got a small group of people, and you actually want to say, yeah, like I'm looking for people here that are super considerate and gentle in their communication, or I'm looking for people that are actually up for hardcore debate and they're going to be really like assertive and bring a lot of energy. I think it's really great at that small scale to sort of set these expectations and standards for each other. And when you have that affinity, that similar way of doing things with people, it's like, finally, this is where I can be myself. And it's just a thing of like, it's great to have that with 3, 4, 5 people at the crew scale, But then at that larger scale of the congregation, if say you've got 100 people at a gathering, to expect everyone is going to share that, or expect everyone in the network is going to share that, I think that's really misguided. And I would hope that only we look for just what is the very minimal things that we have to agree on at that large scale, and that we can enable a much larger diversity of ways of doing and being. And at the mega scale of this sort of like what's happening in society, I really feel like we're going through this transition over a century from these like very traditional monocultures to multicultures, like traditions of kind of getting left behind as the future accelerates. We're getting smushed, all these like different pluralistic perspectives smushed together. And there's a lot of, I mean, in some respects, we're doing really well in the tolerance, but it also feels like there's a lot of mistrust and intolerance growing at the same time. Like it really feels like there's a fresh kind of, I don't know, nationalism or xenophobia in the West, for example, people kind of freaking out about how much difference is suddenly showing up. And I would suspect that if people had more of a sense of affinity at a small scale and more of a sense of like, oh yeah, I have my people and we're safe and we're good, they'd be more able to respect and celebrate and tolerate the differences of the people that they see around them. That like, oh yeah, I'm good, I'm doing my thing, and they're good and they're doing their thing, and it's different, but neither of us are actually in competition. Like we can both have belonging. But when I'm isolated, I'm kind of like a caged animal, and then I see any reason outside of myself to like get inflamed and point the finger outwards, and it's because those people showed up, and yeah, that's part of the big picture, I guess.
I'm enjoying seeing quite this word agency seems to caught fire a little bit. And what is it really? I see fluidity audiobooks picking up on maybe something that Tom was also questioning around it. Like, does agency have something to do with executive function and locus of control? I wasn't sure exactly what this locus of control, what you really mean with that, but yeah, and how does it relate to? Does that naturally gravitate to higher status? Yeah, I think this is a very interesting question where microsolidarity has some, like, I don't know if it's unique, but I'm enjoying exploring what agency means within the practice. When was it? Yeah, the last winter we had a winter camp, and the three of us were there, and I think there were 15 others. A bunch of us were like, Rich was like one of the main source people, the source of Microsolidarity, and there was like me and Jonas who have been sort of stepping into leadership kind of alongside you, and then also like a bunch of others, including like Sarah and Guy, who have been running the practice programs with us and helping in a number of different ways of like evolving the network from like behind the scenes kind of way to make it structurally flow and evolve. But there were also a lot of people who were wanting to step up into leadership. And I think over the 3 days, it became really useful for us to articulate like what agency is available to people in the network at different stages. And I think something that I found a personal like growth edge was like moving from, oh, all voices should be heard and everyone should have equal access to power. This should be like, it's decentralized, and kind of a bit of like a meme around like flat hierarchies, and feeling a bit uncomfortable about saying to people, oh, actually, you don't have decision-making power in that, but you do in this, and like really clarifying where people are welcome to step in and where it's like actually not so much, or do this first. But it was very helpful because it helped me realize that there is in the network some degree of experience being built up and like historical context, which if someone was just to jump in without that context, it might not actually fly that well. And there's like some degree of care and consideration of like where it's going and how it's being held. And yet to still have like a clear like on-ramp for people to step into agency as and when they like where their enthusiasm is calling them to do so. And we came up with this concept called hermit crabbing, which is basically like if you like inviting someone into, like, if you're in a certain leadership role, once you kind of reached your, like, you kind of become comfortable with it, is there a way that you could see someone else who would like to step into that role and become sort of like a guide for them, sort of mentor, support them into that? And once they've stepped into that, is there also some role that they would like to pass on to someone else? And I see this as like agency not really being stuck with like status, but rather like you growing in like, Sarah, you mentioned this was like a developmental context. Your agency is something you're growing as you get more experience and more people start, like, it's more based around trust in our network, like trust on, okay, we've played on in a small scale or with a less risky project together. Okay, let's try something bigger. Like, okay, maybe you've held a network call, like I'm running the network calls once a month. Like, okay, you've facilitated one with me, or you've shown up at a summer camp and you've run a few sessions. We kind of know how each other work. Now, would you like to come and like co-host the practice program with us? I mean, that's still quite a big leap, but yeah. And from there, it's like, maybe do you want to help run the summer camp, and like organize that together, or design an entirely new course would be maybe after that. So it's like we're still developing and defining a structured way for people, like how you can grow your agency within the network, while also holding the network as a whole and where it's going with some kind of care. Maybe there's other ways that Sarah or Rich, you want to like articulate that, but I'm trying to, be like stitch together what I'm trying to say here if it wasn't clear.
I'd love to bring in a dimension to this conversation about agency that I think is really juicy. I sometimes use the word agency to mean something like capacity to realize my internally felt like needs or desires. And so I can wonder about how to design a high agency space where myself and others have an elevated ability to realize these things. And when I'm at summer camp, this for me was a really high agency space. And there's some levers and design there, like open space technology, I think is a really high agency design where I have a chance to say to the group, an invitation to get something that I need or feel that I want. And one of my favorite story I've published this in a YouTube interview on the Microsolidarity channels, but Pietro at summer camp went through this whole like internal developmental arc that was really made possible by having a high agency space where he could do that. And there's lots of blockers that I think we can all feel come up in ourselves that stop us from being able to realize something or have it play out in the world. And it doesn't always work. You can host an open space session and maybe no one shows up. But even in that, there's like this exercise towards agency. And I had that happen once and I kind of thought about it and I was like, well, maybe if I change this thing. And then when I brought it back the next day in a different way, suddenly everyone was into it. And so just being in that process of it helped me expand my ability to realize, to make real something. So for me, that's part of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about agency.
Yeah, I really vibe with that a lot. I can share a blog post that I wrote on this topic, which has a limit, like quite a limited and specific lens into agency that I think is useful, even though it's constrained. But like I'm thinking about agency in terms of this dimension of kind of like how big a group can you command? I have this phrase in Microsolidarity that leadership's the capacity to make a compelling invitation, and like there's this small level of agency which is I can initiate a conversation on a topic that I care about, and yeah, go through the awkwardness of setting up an invitation that no one actually likes, and then reframing it and coming back to it a second time and actually finding out, oh, okay, if I put it this way, people care. And then it's like, well, okay, you can do a conversation. Can you do a dinner club? Could you host a dinner party that meets once a week? Could you could you host a camp for Twitter people for 50 people for 4 days? Could you run an organization? This like expanding circle of responsibility, which is like I say, like maybe an unusual lens into it. But for me, agency is so much about the capacity to make changes in the world. And pretty quickly, once you start the process of becoming activated, becoming a like self-actualized, fully mature adult, pretty soon you reach the limit of what you can do on your own, and it becomes how much coordination can you create, how much trust can you build, how much can you contribute to a field of coherence where people see themselves in each other and are like enrolled into a shared mission. That's a dimension that makes sense to me, and the kind of social mission I'm on is like, I think we need loads of people who feel competent to like play a hosting role for a group of 50 people or 100 people or 150 people. I think like there's this kind of like missing scale with the with the sort of receding significance of religion and church and stuff in a lot of people's lives, clubs, social groupings of all sorts. As they're receding, we just need like I feel like if we had a resurgence in hospitality, in the sense that people know how to pull a group together and keep it feeling good, keep it on task, keep it delicious and fun and connecting and productive. Like if people know how to do that, I feel like there's just like massive benefits across the board for society. And yeah, that's the kind of agency that I'm most interested in. I think it's this one which is about developing a place for yourself, a role for yourself, like being situated in a network of relationships of accountability and care and respect and purpose, and rather than just purely like, oh, how could I be more confident as I negotiate about my next move in my career, or something like that. I feel like we should move on to the next question, because there's some really awesome stuff coming up in the chat. And anyone that is listening, please do drop your notes in the chat, especially little pithy questions. Obviously, those are the easiest to highlight on screen and to respond to. But all the chats are welcome. I wanted to pull this one up from the Levin. I don't know if it's going to swamp our whole screen. Yeah, sorry, Sarah, your face is going to be obscured for a second. How do you manage? Actually, maybe we can obscure my face. Let's see if I can do that. Anyway. How do you manage when people desire participation and doing stuff rather than just belonging? We've discussed how people can be more widely given belonging, and it feels like opportunities for participation are by definition more limited. And there's been some great reactions in the chat to that as well. But maybe Jocelyn, do you want to talk about participation, like what comes after belonging?
Yeah. Last summer I ran a little circle in summer camp, like belonging now what? And like almost everyone came. Everyone wants to know what comes beyond belonging. I think belonging for me, like belonging is one part of the game of community building, but really like discovering a meaningful work or a meaningful project, meaningful action, and like developing, like using that belonging as like almost as like an energy to get something done rather than an end goal in itself, is how I see belonging. So it's kind of like trust. It's like a resource in the bank. And belonging can be broken, trust can be broken, and you can like rebuild it as well. But I think, and you can also overextend. You can realize, I think sometimes I've thought, oh, there's more sense of belonging and social fabric and knowing of one another, less than I thought, and then I'd taken on a larger project than I than that belonging fabric could really hold. And for example, someone like, I really thought someone would be more there with us and like taking financial risk on like hosting a week-long training, and we had to put some money down on the venue, and then they just like dropped out very much at the last moment. I think if I'd known them better, we had more connection, I might have known that and like maybe invited them to participate in the whole thing in a different way. Yeah. So really, for me, belonging is like a bedding upon which you can take risks together. Yeah, and like they grow slowly. I think in the same way that usually you'd like start dating before you introduce someone, or then you'd introduce someone to your family, like, and your friends and your wider network, and then you have like, take an economic risk of buying a house or like investing in a shared something. Like in the same way, like if you're creating community or even like non-romantic ties, it's for me a similar kind of progression of developing belonging, so you can then use that to make something epic happen and really make, like, that's when you help each other in that belonging. You start to know what's important to you, and then is there resonance? Okay, like how can we bring that importance out into action.
Yeah, it's like belonging and then purpose, like the action, like you said, like
Yeah.
this like some outward gesture. And actually, I feel like for me, and I don't know how many people match this, but for me, definitely the quickest way to belong in a new group is to contribute something. Like, oh, you're the one that cooked the dinner. Right, I gotcha. Thank you. You know, like that suddenly it's like I have a reason to exist. It's like a pre-validated. So that spirit of contribution, I think, like is just a very easy pathway in um into belonging. And also I think I want to say like so many projects and startups and ventures and ideas fail precisely due to lack of relational skill. Um, I'm going to make up a statistic, but I'm pretty sure it's like the majority of startups fail because of the relationships in the early setup process. Like you said about even this little example of like hiring a venue or something like, oh, we don't actually have shared understanding about each other. We haven't actually agreed about our norms, or like we don't when we look at our values, they're not prioritized in the same way, and there's like some fundamental mismatch there. Like you can learn how to be much more skillful in groups so that when it does come time to be participating and taking action, things go very smoothly. And I feel like that's a lot of what we do in the network is like Sarah said about the relational gym. It's like let's build the muscle, let's be skillful in groups, and then we can use those groups to do all sorts of things, whether it's like a political mission or starting a business or building a co-housing community or something. Like jumping ahead to build the co-housing community when you haven't done all the work of building shared understanding, like count me out. That's just seems like a really bad plan.
There's also another interesting second dimension to this question, which was, or a comment on like, it feels like opportunities for participation are by definition more limited. And I think that referred to in the network when I was talking about like agency, like, okay, if you've gained a certain amount of like connection, respect, being known and expertise, then you get to do the thing. I think I just wanted to maybe bring that in of like how I see that there is like the network of Microsolidarity, which is just like a congregation of community builders. They're not really a community. Like when even the summer camp, even though it's like a temporary community, it's not like you're going to a summer camp to find your community. You might find a few people there. We call it a congregation is like a dating pool. So you go to a summer camp or a gathering and you like maybe find a few people that you want to form a crew with afterwards. And really, I think Sarah Pelham, she's been really like ace at like creating a lot of crews after she joins a course or a gathering. She's asked like seen who she resonates with there, and then goes and forms a crew, like a small group of 3 to 6 people with whom she wants to take material further and like to integrate it into her life. And so I think in terms of agency, it's not just the vertical, like how can you get more into like the into like taking on more responsibility within the architecture of the network by like facilitating something or hosting something within the network. But the agency is something as like that you can take what you've learned and ideally you take it into your own local community and like what Sarah was doing, like form a crew or like use those skills and patterns to build more belonging and like meaningful work in your locality or with the people that you know. So in that way, I find like the opportunity for agency is limitless. Yeah, on that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully we build some kind of positive peer pressure in the network, which is not about like, oh, the way to belong here is to become super invested in the network and make it your life priority or something. But actually that the peer pressure kind of goes in the other direction, which is like the way to gain status here, the way to be the coolest member of the Microsolidarity network is to be out in your local community doing stuff, like it's to be extending your skill set in hospitality and learning how to be a really effective member of groups and how to become the kind of person that you can just drop into any group and know that the group is going to get better because you're there. And that's the set of skills that we're really trying to train people in and share and learn from each other and encourage each other in. Speaking of which, we're coming towards the top of the hour, so I feel like we should wrap up. But I did want to make sure that we gave a quick plug, we've got 2 more of these courses coming up over the next few weeks. Jocelyn, you and Sarah are both involved. Maybe the 2 of you could say something about them, and I can go dig up the links in case anyone wants to check it out and see if they want to join us.
Yeah, sure. Sarah, do you want to talk about the Vibes program, and then I'll mention what the crewing one's about?
Sure. I think if you are curious about the Vibes program, it's the best place to start to lean into this idea of having a space to practice. It's been designed to be participatory, and so you show up and you hang out with cool people and you practice the thing. And so that's kind of why we call it the Vibes program. Is it's this glimpse into and this time to be in the vibes of what we're talking about. And people who go through the program often, Rich kind of shared this earlier, but they say, wow, it's so cool how this vibe of belonging was built, and we're on Zoom and it's the internet and it's virtual, and yet I'm feeling it. So that's kind of what we are trying to create with that program.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, and then Sarah, Rich, myself, Jonas, and Guy, we created the crewing program, which we ran once before as a response to a lot of people at the end of the Vibes program being like, but how do I bring this into my community? And it's kind of like related to what I was just saying about really bringing your agency into your local space. So crewing is one of the core practices of Microsolidarity. It's about creating a compelling invitation, like what Rich was mentioning, the art of doing that, and starting to develop community at the speed of trust and the speed of belonging in your local, with a group of people who you choose. And something that I found interesting about the crewing program as an unexpected outcome was that the people who joined actually realized, like, oh, I want to form a crew with the people in this course because they're going to be my support buddies for creating a crew in real life or in my community. So it's also a really nice place to meet people who are like trying this out for the first time, but also people will be there who have been trying this many, many times. I know some people have joined the Vibes program like 3 times, and then the crewing one again, and they want to join it again, and they're already busy with crewing, but just want that companionship, and they can offer a lot of expertise and experience as well. So yeah, it's really cool. And both courses are like over the course of 2 weeks, and they're on Tuesday, Thursday. Is it Tuesday and Thursday? Is that this one? Anyway, two a week over the course of 2 weeks. So they're pretty intensive and like quick and snappy, and very easy to follow. Yeah, maybe Rich, if you put the link to the Microsolidarity website for people, then.
Yeah, I put the link on Twitter and it didn't show up on the streaming platform for some reason, but it's there.
Yeah.
And also to say they're at different ends of the time zone spectrum. So if you're in one part of the world, you won't be able to join one, but you'll be able to join the other, and that's part of the thinking process. So yeah, you can check out the other one. I'd say both of these courses are great for anyone that wants to, up level in their relational skills, how to be a more effective group person, how to learn how to command the power of belonging. Sprinkle, sprinkle. Hey, wow, people suddenly feel good together. Oh, wow, I have a place to play in my community. Oh, my goodness, my isolation has been replaced with a sense of satisfaction and abundance. And you fall in love, guaranteed. Yeah, everyone, 100% money back guarantee.
It just might be with new parts of yourself, which is also good.
I'm going to say thank you to my wonderful co-hosts, and thanks to the folks in the chat. It's been awesome having your contributions. It's hard for us to like keep up and respond to everything, but yeah, it's been influencing how we're thinking and talking. And maybe we'll do this again sometime. It's been fun for me.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Thank you all.
Nice.
Ciao.